Tavant, I was a part-time co-founder, and it is a misguided concept, so don't try and be a part-time co-founder, okay?
Okay.
Because either somebody is a founder or somebody is not a founder. The part-time co-founder stuff is usually lipstick on a pig. Fundraising process actually is highly educational, so I would strongly encourage everybody to learn what it is like to cold call.
Okay.
And by cold calling, I mean you pick up a phone and call up somebody with no introduction, and you tell them, "Mujhe paise chahiye." I think it is a very, very important experience for everybody to learn. It teaches one to not take yourself too seriously. By staying in play, one often meets the right time at the right place. So one of the lessons for those of you who decide to start companies is often persisting with an idea allows you to meet the market as it turns, as opposed to saying 3 महीने try कर लिया अब मैं घर जा रहा हूँ. Now by the way, after 10 years you can also be called the biggest idiot because the market never turned. That also is a possibility, but one has to take that risk. What I have learned is you got to stay in the game for longer than what you thought to meet the market. Everybody should learn sales, and children are the best salespeople. You look at how little kids sell. They figure out mom is not buying, they'll go sell to dad. They figure out crying is what sells, they will cry. They will figure out that if you don't tell one and you tell the other, and you find a disconnect in them, they have not talked to each other.
You find a niche out of that position.
So sales is a skill that everybody needs to know. If you think that something is the correct thing to do, you should talk about it. You should try and convince people about it. And if they don't agree, they don't agree. What holds most of us back from selling our ideas, and sales is considered a bad word. Somehow people think that whoever is selling something is trying to make a fool of you. Actually, the best salespeople are the ones who are totally honest. They don't sell customers stuff that they don't need.
You stay in the States, but you invest in India. How does it work?
So I started investing in India in 1999, and I started investing because my prior company had exited to Amazon, and 99 was a very good year for the stock market. So I was feeling rich for a little while till the stock market took a beating. And so I started investing in 99. I've had a team in India since 1996.
Got it.
So there was exposure to India from that time. It was an outsourced team. And then in 99, I invested in Daksh,
IBM,
which finally got bought by IBM.
Got it.
And it was two people who were known to me through friendship and relationships. And that is what got me started investing in India. And after that was Make My Trip, and then a company called Merit Track. And then I decided that I will move here. So in that period, I was traveling back and forth in the context of a company called Tavant Technologies, where I was one of the co-founders.
Got it.
So because of that, the relationship with India got deeper and deeper. And I had more access here because Junglee, which was the company that I had exited, was well known because we had not had that many exits by Indian founders. So my access to companies was better here than in the Bay Area. And I was spending enough time, and I feel more at home in India than I do in the US. So all of those things came together.
थोड़ा सा हम पीछे आते हैं सर. जी. How were your IIT Kanpur days?
So I had the most wonderful time at Kanpur because there was no internet. The campus was far away from the city, and I had a wonderful set of friends. So we just had a lot of fun watching movies, and I was also, I think, fair to say, what is called a maggu. So I also enjoyed
reading, always into academics.
But I did other things also. But all in all, I have no complaints about the IIT Kanpur days.
Got it.
My closest friends come from both my IIT Kanpur days and then the Stanford days.
Then how did Stanford happen? When did you decide कि you want to go completely deep into PhD? PhD कब करने का कब सोचा आपने?
So it was more an action driven out of thoughtlessness rather than thoughtfulness. So this was 88 is when I graduated, and my choice was either to go work for a software company, and I still remember the job offer was 2,700 rupees per month.
This was 1988. 1988. Okay, got it.
Which was a perfectly fine number. But most of the people, 70-80% of most of the folks who graduated then went overseas for higher education because so I applied not because I had clarity that I want to do a PhD, but because I was one more lemming who was doing what most everybody else was doing. So I went for my PhD not because of a burning passion for innovating in computer science, but because that is what everybody else was doing. So I also went ahead and did that.
And what was the topic for the?
So actually the PhD program was very interesting because after a year I realized that I had not learned how to think for myself, as was evidenced by the fact that I had gone for a PhD program without knowing what I was signing up for. So then I spent 3 years in a lot of self-discovery mode and did no work. and I had a patient advisor who tolerated me through those 3 years. So finally found the problem that I was working on. The more interesting part of the PhD program for me personally was the fact that one, I got married. So I met my wife in the PhD program. That was the
best thing that happened.
Best thing that happened to me ever. And the other one was that I was forced to go through this growing up process where I learned to think a little more for myself. And of course the journey continues, but it was a step jump, which was a semi-existential crisis.
Got it.
Because the PhD program was totally undirected. My advisor was the kind of person who just let you wander around, and he believed that you need to figure it out yourself. So that was the more interesting part of the PhD program.
You mentioned you went to a lot of discovery mode.
Yeah.
How did, can you double click on that?
Discovery mode, another more less euphemistic word of that is a lot of anxiety. Because you would wake up every morning and didn't know what I was doing, while the guys who knew what they were doing were busy publishing papers. So you attend conferences and I would not have anything to present, and they were all my, if you will, same cohort who were busy publishing and graduating. So a serious existential crisis. So it was not so much discovery as in a peaceful way of sitting and thinking through things, but a highly anxiety driven mode of asking, what the hell am I up to kind of question, until I slowly figured out that I need to find my own problem as opposed to rely on somebody else.
So, बहुत rare होता है when we see he's someone into academics, someone who is doing his PhD, venture into a startup. How did the transition happen from PhD in computer science to starting your own venture, Junglee?
Yeah. So I went to work for IBM Research after I graduated, and lasted all of 1 year there, because I was still not comfortable with what I was doing. Then ended up at Oracle and lasted 9 months there. And even there, I was uncomfortable but didn't know why. And both places I had wonderful bosses.
And what were you doing?
So at IBM, I was doing research in databases. And at Oracle, I was implementing the work that I had done in my thesis as a part of the Oracle database system. And then I just became an accidental entrepreneur because I was unhappy. That is why I quit and started a company. And not because there was clarity that this is a wonderful problem, along with 4 other friends. So it was more running away from something rather than running to something. But the good news was that it was a good team. And then I discovered that it's entrepreneurship that I like. But I stumbled into it rather than having clarity that this is what I want to do.
2 things on this. Number 1, you mentioned you had great boss. What qualities of those people you admire the most, which makes you say कि यार ये बहुत अच्छे लोग थे?
So for me, it's an opportunity missed. The gentleman at IBM, a guy called Robert Morris. What do I really admire about the man? And I really think it was an opportunity missed. One, he could operate in many different domains. So he was an electrical engineer turned physicist, turned computer scientist, turned storage engineer, turned services guy. So he did all kinds of things. Very patient, and was happy to let me stumble through problems. And then my second boss, Rakesh Agarwal, very similar, very again patient and willing to let me make mistakes. So I think that is a very rare and a very good quality in bosses, that they are willing to let their team make mistakes and find their way. And the same thing with my Oracle boss, a guy called Alan Downing, was also happy to let me make my mistakes while being there to quote unquote defend me from his bosses. So create the room so that I could make mistakes and learn.
And Junglee was a price comparison platform. Idea कैसे आया था? Because from hindsight it looks like a very simple idea. So how did that happen?
So the idea was not mine. It was one of the co-founders, a guy called Dallin. So he was a PhD student. 3 of the co-founders were PhD students at Stanford even then. And Dallin was putzing around with a comparison shopping engine for finding apartments.
Nice.
That 2 BHK, 1.5 bathroom, it was all classified ads. So how do you gather the data, extract from that number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms, so on and so forth, and then make that searchable. And we thought we'll start a database company. That was the original thought. And then fortunately the gentleman who joined us as CEO pointed us towards actually making an application, not a database. So we started a job search application, not a comparison shopping application. And the job search application was such that if you were looking for a job around Washington DC, you could say, I've got a master's degree in biology and I'm looking for this salary range within 3 miles of Washington DC. And we would scrape all the job listings from the different companies, extract structure out of them and make that queryable. We did comparison shopping on retail as a 1 year out project for Yahoo.
Got it.
And that was not our core business. Even though the company got bought for comparison shopping, the core business and all the revenue actually came from employment classifieds.
Wow. And so you started this in the States, but how did the name Junglee came?
The name Junglee came because at that time Yahoo was a hot company. There was there was no Google. Yahoo was the hot company. And the gentleman who wrote us our first check, we played this Shammi Kapoor song for him.
He was an Indian?
He was a Japanese guy. Okay. So he caught only 2 words in it. One was Yahoo and the other was Junglee. So he said we should call ourselves Junglee.
Nice story. Nice story.
We became Junglee.
And then you got acquired by Amazon
in 98.
How did that happen? Did you guys reach out ki, okay, now it's time to merge, or did Amazon reached out ki?
Yeah, so it was Amazon who reached out. And these things are always what is the word, bi-directional things. There is never only one party that is interested in the other. And that time Amazon used to sell only books. And one of the reasons that Amazon bought the company was to figure out if they can become a everything store by putting a comparison shopping layer on the top. And that way if somebody came in and looked for anything, they would be able to find it. Some things Amazon would sell, other things Amazon would redirect to other people, with the goal of over time then selling more things directly. But that did not turn out to be the strategy that they implemented finally. They stayed a direct retailer and added more things one by one without any of this layer. So the reason that they had acquired us, that did not play out. But that was the reason why they came in and bought us.
So you're basically saying that this acquisition failed on the Amazon's part.
Ji.
What happens after acquisition? Was it an all-stock deal, or
it was an all-stock deal?
Got it. And then what did did you continue your role, or was it like you have to do certain other things because the agenda, the main leadership team has changed, the vision has changed? How was it like? So post acquisition,
I had another wonderful boss there, and I left that too.
But you were the co-founder, right?
But after we got acquired by Amazon, it was a much bigger company. So and this product that we were building is not what finally everybody concluded that Amazon will take to market. So got assigned to a different project, and there had a boss. Again, very, very good man to work for.
Got it.
But the same disease of impatience in working in a large company afflicted me again. So I left and started Tavant along with 4 other people. 2 of them were my colleagues from Junglee, and 2 other people. So didn't take advantage of that opportunity either.
Can you magnify, double click on that disease that you are talking about?
So I think the disease would probably qualify as being unemployable. So hard to work for somebody else, and therefore end up breaking out on my own time and time again.
But how can you be unemployable? You had the IIT degree, you had the Stanford degree. What makes you think like
unemployed is mindset, because it requires, and there is nothing good or nothing bad about this.
Right.
So please don't get me wrong. A lot of times entrepreneurship is exalted as the only path forward. I think that is a very unidimensional and misguided sales pitch, because 99% of the world is not entrepreneurial and still goes on. So clearly there is a lot of value for folks who are not entrepreneurs also. In fact, if there were no non-entrepreneurs, nobody would work for entrepreneurs. To your question though, the IIT degree and stuff, I think there is this other dimension, which is the willingness to make the investment of what it takes to settle down in a big company and be a little more compliant than I probably am. Some of those characteristics are missing. Not qualifications, but attitude.
Got it. Yeah. And what do you think? What is entrepreneurship?
What is entrepreneurship? You know, I have not contemplated that question deeply enough. So I would say, whenever one is willing to take the risk of creating something, that is entrepreneurship. And it could be within a large context, it could be within a standalone context, it needn't be a separate company, but when one takes a problem and tries to create a solution of a standalone nature, to me that is entrepreneurship. The more, if you will, commonly implied aspect of it is that then the commercial fruits of that should also be reaped by the same person. But I don't necessarily buy into that very last bit. So if one is in a large company and there is a problem that nobody is willing to take ownership of, if somebody is willing to take that, there is that element of risk where it is not common wisdom. To me, that is entrepreneurship.
And then Tavant happened. Right? क्या कर रहे थे सर आप तवंत में? मतलब what was it all about?
क्या कर रहे थे तवंत में? So Tavant में I was a part-time co-founder.
Okay.
Because
this is a very new thing to us.
And it is a misguided concept, so don't try and be a part-time co-founder, okay?
Okay.
Because either somebody is a founder or somebody is not a founder. The part-time co-founder stuff is usually lipstick on a pig. I was a part-time co-founder in the following sense that, so my wife was also one of the co-founders of Tavant. And we both didn't want to work in the same place. And my boss there, a guy called Sarvesh, who continues to run the company until today, is just an amazing guy to work for. So between us, my wife and I, it was clear that she's a better fit for the company because she ran engineering there for a while. So I did odd jobs at Tavant. But I'll tell you what Tavant did as opposed to what I was doing at Tavant. Tavant started out as a SaaS company before SaaS was an acronym in the market. It used to be called ASP then, Application Service Provider. And we started in March of 2000. And for those of you who are either who have read that history or are old enough, March of 2000 was when the stock market crashed. We raised money without even meeting the investors. We picked up the phone, people said, oh, you were part of the Junglee team, we will give you money.
Wow.
And it was bad timing. And while the idea was interesting, people were not willing to buy into all their data, an enterprise class customer putting their data in the hands of a startup outside their outside their data centers. Because by then that was not accepted. So the company ran into trouble within 8-9 months, and Sarvesh and the other leadership team decided that they will convert the company from a SaaS company to a services company.
Okay.
So
nowadays it happens the other way.
The other direction.
Right.
Okay. But then when you have to survive, you do what it takes. And since then the company has gone through several such cycles. In 2008, they also had a fairly serious mishap because of another financial crisis, but they've persevered. And it's the services company that got built. And that is what Tavant continues to do till today.
Then what happened at, in that organization which led you to co-found Helion?
So in that organization, so that company, Tavant, I still believe that the model is, even then was revolutionary and continues to be interesting, which is, it is a technology-led services company in that it has a lot of intellectual property that is owned by the company. That doesn't necessarily get sold, but the solutions get built on top of it.
Can you give some examples?
non-software example, and then we can talk about a software
Perfect.
example. So let's say between the three of us, there's another person sitting here. We invent a new kind of a wrench, okay, which can open very hard to open nuts very easily.
Okay.
We can either take that wrench and try and convert it into a product, which we will sell to anybody who wants to buy a wrench, or we can create 70 copies of this wrench and start a plumbing company where we can solve the hard to solve problems because we've got this magical wrench. Okay. The second one would qualify as a technology enabled services company. If we start selling the wrench, that would become a product company where the wrench is the product. Whereas in the other manifestation where we don't sell the wrench, that wrench stays within our company only. What we sell are services. We fix pipes, but we fix them twice as fast because we've got this magical wrench. That would be a tool enabled. So in the software world, for instance, let us say somebody, Tavant, built a system for heavy machinery manufacturers like Mercedes, Caterpillar, Komatsu, JLG. So they build a software system for them to manage their after sales support. But instead of selling the software on a license basis, they would go to these people and tell them, we will build you a custom solution. Except that 80% of that solution was coming out of a box. And therefore the customer got it cheaper, and Tavant was able to deliver faster and make more money because 80% of the solution was already built, and then you modify it and deliver what the customer needs, as opposed to trying to sell them a out of the box software. Does that kind of sort of
very
make sense?
easily, very explicitly?
And more and more of this is happening with the AI world today. Actually, a lot of AI companies really lend themselves to this model, disproportionately so than most other technologies before.
So we'll come to the AI wala part pakka.
Yeah.
But usse pehle tell us certain advantages and demerits of both
Ji.
software and selling software versus selling service versus selling product.
So I think they are both extremely good businesses, and there is a lot of, especially in the venture capital world, a bias towards investing in product companies.
Is more.
Yes. Because one can make the growth can often be faster, and therefore the return on investment and IRR is higher.
More scalable. Just
So-
replicate the product.
Yeah. So see, more scalable is a tricky question because Infosys, Wipro, TCS are fairly large companies, and there are very many large services companies as there are large product companies. More quickly scaled is, and therefore return on investment higher, is probably more apt rather than services companies. So they're both good businesses.
Right.
So merit demerit ke bajaye, I will talk about strengths of one and the strengths of the other.
Please.
Because merit demerit makes it feel like one is better than the other, but that is not my belief. I think they're both wonderful types of businesses. Different people, different opportunity sets make both compelling businesses. In software licensing companies, the advantages turn out to be much higher gross margins, but it takes a lot more money to get to profitability because you have to invest a lot for which you don't get paid
At that spot.
at that time. You get paid later,
Eventually, yeah.
and you take that cost of development and you distribute it across lots of people because you don't tell one person that, hey, you're going to pay for this work. In a services company, whatever work you do, you tell that person you're going to pay for this work.
Got it.
So the repeatability of the work is not there, but repeatability of the process of delivering work is there. Okay, somebody who knows how to construct buildings can keep constructing more and more and more buildings. Whereas once you've constructed a building, you can keep renting it again and again. In one case, you are reusing the building. In the other case, you are reusing the skills to build a building. So therefore, the quote-unquote scalability, as is often called, is higher in that software company because you can take one thing and sell it again and again.
Right.
In theory. often finding a thing that you can sell again and again is the hard part.
Difficult, yeah.
So can you really build a large company still remains an open question, even though one would assume that of course I can sell it again and again. So the hardness shifts from one place to another place. The hardness shifts from, sure, I've made something that can be repeatable, but is it actually repeatable? That becomes the harder problem. In a services company, everybody needs
certain
customization work. So the applicability is a lot more
easier.
It's easier, just that you have to keep doing the hard work
again
and again. Okay, so the nature of the two businesses are different. People who have much more desire for, inclination for, ability to institutionalize process are better suited to building services companies because it is process intensive. Human beings are your machine, and they get up and run away, and some of them never come back. Whereas in the other case, you convert things into software, and it is easier to repeat running software than it is to repeat running processes. On the other hand, in software companies, challenges turn out to be somewhat different, where you really do need to identify a repeatable enough product so that all that initial investment is worth it. And that doesn't happen as often as gets written about in the newspapers.
And is it becoming harder and harder to find those scalable, repeatable?
So not really, because the playing field keeps changing. What do I mean by that? 20 years ago, and I will just use, let's take consumer software as an example. Before mobile phones came, people bought PC software. Once mobile phones came, they started buying apps. Now one will say, oh, but we'll run out of apps. But then we keep changing behavior. Now when more people start flying, some more kinds of apps will come about. So the needs
keep on evolving, and there is enough gap.
There's always, and that is true in the enterprise, and that's true in consumer. In enterprise it is more nuanced because enterprise needs don't change as quickly, but they also keep changing.
Then, so this was all the journey while you were, in the cockpit building things.
Ji.
How did the shift happen ki nahi, now we have to start investing in other...
Yeah. So I had started dabbling in angel investing in 99 time frame, soon after the Amazon acquisition. Like I was mentioning, I felt rich for a little while.
Got it.
And then I realized that one, I became poor when the stock market fell. So wo bhram khatam ho gaya. The other more important thing that I realized was that I actually didn't understand how the investing business worked. I still don't, but that time I understood even less. So I ended up joining, and Tavant was not a full-time job, even though I did several full-time gigs there, but in chunks. So I ended up joining an internship program called the Kaufman program.
Kaufman Fellowship.
Yeah.
Reputed one.
So it was a different structure then. It used to take in people who were not already VCs. Now it takes in people who are already VCs. At that time it took in people who wanted to be VCs.
Okay.
And their belief was that just like a car mechanic doesn't become a mechanic by studying videos, they become a mechanic by doing things. And then you figure out that if you tighten a nut too much, you break the threads. But you can't figure that out by watching videos without actually breaking a few threads. And that was the belief of the people who set up the program, that it is a apprenticeship business. So I became an apprentice for a period of 18 months. And then I had the choice of either continuing on with the firm where I was an apprentice, but in the middle I came back to India to run Tavant's office because of some change in leadership. So I took a leave of absence from the Kaufman program, came back to India for 6-7 months to run Tavant's office in Bangalore, and went back. And during that period I decided that it makes sense to actually relocate to India and start a venture fund.
Got it. So this way, in this thing, you mentioned you felt rich for a certain time, and because the stock market and then the stock market fell. But I believe that Amazon was one of the only companies which survived the .com.
Yeah, but the stock market went through its own gyrations.
Got it.
While the company survived. Yeah.
So how was the sudden influx of money after selling Junglee, after getting acquired?
So it was sudden influx of Amazon stock.
Yes.
Not of cash.
Okay.
Which is why the sentiment of feeling rich and sentiment of
got it. So then you started India, probably India's one of the earliest domestic venture capital.
So in the second go around. So the earliest Indian venture funds had already been created between 96 to 2000. A lot of them were created in 2000. So that credit of starting the venture business in India goes to a lot of different people. I was part of the second wave, which started in 2006.
Got it.
And between 2000 and 2006, most of the venture funds had gone out of business, barring a few, because there was a drought. Everybody had thought that the internet would arrive in India in 2000 because of the .com boom in the US. But then actually the internet didn't really take off in India till 2010. But the venture business restarted in India in 2006. So a lot of the firms that you see today started in the 2006 period.
And your first angel investment, what is 1999? What was your first investment?
That was a company called Daksh.
Okay.
Which was a BPO company.
Got it.
Which finally got bought by IBM.
Great. And then Helion, we know, $600 million. But what was the first fund?
And it was 140 million.
Again, what was the struggle behind raising it?
Yeah.
How was the fundraising process?
Fundraising process actually is highly educational. So I would strongly encourage everybody to learn what it is like to cold call.
Okay.
And by cold calling, I mean you pick up a phone and call up somebody with no introduction, and you tell them,
पैसे चाहिए
मुझे पैसे चाहिए. Okay. And they will say कि अपनी शक्ल देखी है. Okay. So I think it is a very, very important experience for everybody to learn. It teaches one to not take yourself too seriously.
Okay.
So how did the first fund get raised? So luck always has a very large part to play in most things. So we started raising money in 2005.
Okay.
And it took us about 9 months to raise money. And that is because we got lucky. And pretty much everybody I spoke to who were well-wishers in the US and told them कि मैं इंडिया के लिए फंड रेज करने की सोच रहा हूँ. Pretty much everybody told me कि ये बेवकूफ़ी मत करो. And actually pretty much everybody is correct. There were a couple of friends who encouraged me. A gentleman called Ravi Adusumali who runs Elevation Capital not only encouraged me, helped me enormously. But the vast majority of people told me that this ain't going to happen.
Okay.
And very good reasons. It was not because they were trying to be discouraging, but because they were solid reasons.
Like?
So there had been several false starts with Asia investing in the past, and people had bad memories. There was no proven venture capital business in India. So the question was, what would be the catalyst for restarting venture in India? There were hardly any product companies out of India. They were the same 3 or 4 companies that all of us used to talk about that as though it is happening. Infosys also was not a product company. There were 2 or 3 at that point in time that people used to keep putting out, but that was hardly evidence of mass change. What really helped, at least Helion, I don't know about the others, was that a lot of articles started coming as to how India is the next China. At that time, China was already proven to be flying high. And once these articles started coming out that India is the next China,
you leveraged those.
The same set of people who between July and November had told us that please never show up on my doorstep again, started calling us up saying, कहाँ हो? Okay. We tell them कि सर आपने तो मना कर दिया. He said, नहीं वो कल की बात थी. Come back. So I attribute that to being at the right place at the right time. We did have a very good team. Don't get me wrong. But it takes other things also
to work in your favor.
And timing is a thing that often is both out of your control. But by staying in play, one often meets the right time at the right place. So one of the lessons for those of you who decide to start companies is often persisting with an idea allows you to meet the market as it turns, as opposed to saying 3 महीने try कर लिया, अब मैं घर जा रहा हूँ. Now, by the way, after 10 years, you can also be called the biggest idiot because the market never turned. That also is a possibility. But one has to take that risk. What I have learnt is you got to stay in the game for longer than what you thought to meet the market most often. And then indeed once in a while you will discover that you stayed for too long. But staying for too long is a risk that you have to take 9 times out of 10. Staying in play.
And how do you increase your chance of being lucky? The one thing is by staying longer, by showing up.
So what are the things that does improve? You're absolutely right. One does need luck, but one cannot sit on one's ass and wait for one's luck. So being intellectually honest, and by that I mean hearing in an unfiltered manner what the ecosystem is telling you. How do you do that? You do that by, actually it is the same thing that spirituality teaches you, which is you drop as many filters as you can. So learn to look at data and learn to look at input that you get from other people without a preconceived notion of this is what I want from that data. So see what that data tells you and then put your beliefs alongside it, and then you can still consciously choose to ignore the data. But it is a conscious choice of saying data is telling me that I shouldn't be doing this, but I will do this, as opposed to filtering out the data that does not agree with your hypothesis without even acknowledging it. Am I making sense?
Yes.
So somebody could tell me that, hey, you my friend will never make a good cricketer. I should ask, why are they saying this? And I should get that data together. I can still choose to say that I will ignore them all, but at least I should have done a good job of understanding why people are telling me what they are telling me.
Let's double click on this.
Ji.
We know that the biggest bet were those which were very contrarian to the popular belief. So if somebody is saying certain, if most of the world is saying in a certain way, how do you go about, not hearing to those? Because that is what data is saying, and then having a very contrarian view and then beating the odds.
So actually what I am saying is you should hear that.
Okay.
That doesn't mean you should agree with that. Okay.
Got it.
The dangerous thing is when one doesn't even hear it. So one should hear it, one should acknowledge it, one should understand it.
And then go against it.
And even then, if you choose to go against it, then time will tell you whether you're a genius or not. But at least you won't be a delusional fool. You will be a consciously thought out, misguided entrepreneur.
Makes sense.
But that is a culpable offense. But not hearing what the market tells you. Because what ends up happening is that when you listen objectively to what the market is telling you, you start adjusting what you do. And you might still follow your vision, but then you have the opportunity to start modifying the vision. Whereas if you're not even listening to the market, and if you're not intellectually asking honestly what people are saying, then you become like the emperor who has no clothes. You got to hear people who say, dude, you're naked. And you can choose to say, you know what, so be it. Okay?
Got it.
That's okay.
So I have a lot of questions coming out of this. So number one was that you mentioned about everybody should learn that fundraise process. That's a very, how should one go about that? How should one learn that?
So fundraise is just a symptom. Everybody should learn sales.
Okay.
And children are the best salespeople. You look at how little kids sell. They figure out mom is not buying, they'll go sell to dad. Okay. They figure out crying is what sells, they will cry. Okay. They will figure out that if you don't tell one and you tell the other, and you find a disconnect in them, they have not talked to each other.
You find leverage out of that position.
So sales is is a skill that everybody needs to know.
How?
How is often by, actually, often Cab, there is only one thing that I know, which is to not be afraid of failing. So, if you think that something is the correct thing to do, you should talk about it. You should try and convince people about it. And if they don't agree, they don't agree. What holds most of us back from selling our ideas, and sales is considered a bad word. Somehow people think that whoever is selling something is trying to make a fool of you. Actually, the best salespeople are the ones who are totally honest. They don't sell customers stuff that they don't need. Challenge turns out when we don't even try and sell what we believe in. And that is what I mean by sales. So let us say the three of us were talking about whether we should paint this room blue or green. And I do believe that it should be green. And I've got 3 reasons why it should be. I should make an honest attempt at convincing you. And if you don't agree, that's okay. What gets in the way is I start thinking, what if you don't agree? Then will I look small? Will I look bad? Blah, blah, blah. That is why I mean by saying everybody should try cold calling. Because cold calling is trying to sell to somebody that you don't know. So it's an easier way of learning how to fail with people that you know. But we really need to get into this place where we should be able to suggest that I think this is right. And then, or similarly ask questions. Ask stupid questions, what we call stupid questions. Actually, no question is stupid. And often when you ask a question, you will discover that actually everybody around you has the same question. And everybody is sitting quiet thinking that, boss, this is a stupid question. It happens in classrooms, happens in board meetings, happens in social settings where somebody used an acronym. और कोई शर्म के मारे नहीं पूछता कि बॉस ये होता क्या है, क्योंकि सबको लगता है कि दूसरे को पता है. एंड कोई पूछ लेगा एंड देन सडनली हाँ मुझे भी नहीं पता. आई डोंट नो आप लोगों के साथ होता है कि नहीं, मेरे साथ तो सारा वक्त होता है. एंड आई एम स्टिल स्कैर्ड ऑफ आस्किंग. दैट्स द सो दैट इज द अदर गैप कि समझ में बहुत सारी चीज़ें आती हैं, कम बहुत चीज़ें कर पाते हैं. बट दिस इज व्हाट आई मीन बाय कोट एंड कोट कोल्ड कॉलिंग. इफ आई वर टू जनरलाइज इट, आई वुड पुट इट इन द फियर ऑफ looking bad.
Got it.
One needs to get over that skill, and cold calling is one way of doing it, which is to call unknown people and tell them, "Plaksha के पैसे दोगे?" And वो बोलेंगे बाहर में जाओ. Okay.
Can you throw in some most interesting conversations that you had, during your cold calls? What was the most interesting? Tell us one or two most interesting cold calls you made.
So I used to fundraise for Stanford.
Okay.
Because they used to pay $6 an hour. That was the reason I used to fundraise for Stanford. And people would curse you till kingdom come. कि कभी जब हमें ज़रूरत होती है तुम बात भी नहीं करते और जब पैसे की ज़रूरत पड़ती है तुम पैसे मांगने आ जाते हो. So, which is why actually, by the way, I think that all universities should get their students to fundraise on behalf of the university. You develop an appreciation for how hard it is for the administration to keep a university running, because the students, we start taking things for granted. Please don't get me wrong, I don't mean any offense, that's not an accusation. I'm talking about me as a student and several other people that I know. So that was one. During the Helion fundraise, which has probably been among the most, the freshest fundraising experience and also among the most brutal. I have been to small offices in New York City where at least 2 times I was afraid that I will get beaten up, because the shadiest characters in the room and dark and smoking stuff that you didn't want to be in the company of. But yet somebody said कि उनके पास पैसे हैं, मांगने चले जाओ. तो मांगने चले गए. Okay.
Got it. So, and did your Stanford degree and IITK helped you in that? It comes as a signaling effect while you do this fund. Did it help?
It all is a very powerful signaling effect, because we stand on the shoulders of other people always, and a lot of people from other IITs have done well, and therefore you get given the benefit of doubt, as is the case what I guess y'all are going to do for a whole bunch of people who follow you.
True.
And a lot of your teachers are going to be that for Plaksha, given that it's a new organization. Similarly with Stanford. And the most recent things that you do always carry more weight. But And these are also, by the way, things that you can use and you should use to your advantage. While one should not do things for the brand alone, it is naive to then not use the brand when you have a chance to use it, because there is a signaling effect.
How can we leverage? We are at Plakshasa.
Ji.
We don't have an IIT tag.
Ji.
How should we go ahead? How can we have that signaling effect power in our work?
Yeah. So, one, it is practical to recognize that the IIT brand will have more power than the Plaksha brand, at least for the foreseeable future. It is naive to think that day one, it's a level playing field. It is not. However, there are several other things that Plaksha has that IIT folks might or might not be able to claim. For instance, there are many more actively involved founders who can be engaged, whose brand can be used as a proxy for the institutional brand, not just time, whose brand can be used as proxies for the institutional brand. Your approach to education here is very different. Highlighting those aspects is a differentiator, because what are people looking for? The word differentiator is both a very abused but also a very powerful word. There are true differentiators, and if one were to call out those aspects of Plaksha that the rest of the world is tuned into, and by the way, what the world is tuned into changes. मौसम जैसे बदलता है, हाँ? कभी AI का बोलबाला है, कभी डेटा साइंस का कभी बोलबाला है, कभी हॉरिजॉन्टल लर्निंग का बोलबाला है. कुछ साल पहले डिग्रीज वर गोइंग टू गेट डिस्ट्रॉयड, वो थोड़ा मौसम ठंडा पड़ गया है. सो यू शुड फिगर आउट कि what is the world tuned to, and correspondingly figure out those aspects of the Plaksha education that differentiate you from the others. For instance, and I'm cooking this up, so please bear with me. I should spend more thought and I'll be happy to brainstorm together, क्योंकि आप लोगों ने इसके बारे में कहीं ज़्यादा सोचा होगा. So I'm just brainstorming. For instance, you can claim to be entrepreneurs right away, because if we go back to at least my definition of an entrepreneur, it was to be willing to take on a problem that somebody else is not. Being willing to take on the problem of how to put in place an educational institution is a problem that you all are helping solve. You're party to putting this thing together. So for a certain sector of universities and a certain sector of things, emphasizing the entrepreneurial nature of what you're doing. Just starting a company is not just entrepreneurship. You all are starting this program from scratch as opposed to taking it on from somebody else. These can be embellished, highlighted. Embellished was the wrong word. Highlighted appropriately as differentiators. So brand can be created, and this shouldn't fall in the category of brand. And this should fall in the category of catching somebody's attention first, because a brand this is not a brand. The brand would be to figure out, like I said, leveraging founders' brands, leveraging companies' brands.
Got it.
And so on and so forth. So it is something that you all will have to work on harder than the IIT folks, but can be made to work for your advantage by also figuring out where you target.
Got it.
You should pick potentially people who are not just making decisions based upon that first word, but figure out what is that first word that forces people to get to the second and the third word, because there you can differentiate yourself much more effectively than the IITs.
So you wrote the first check in Flipkart, sir. As an angel investor?
Not the first. I was among the first.
Among the first.
Not the first.
What was the Sachin and Binny's pitch to you? How did they convince you to, write? How was it like?
So I was brought into Flipkart more by the team at Excel.
Okay.
Abhishek and Shubhruto invited me into it. And so it wasn't that Sachin and Binny were trying to convince me. They had already convinced the Excel team. And they were kind enough to come and also talk to me and say, will you join the round? So I was not the make or break item in that financing. Okay, I was a tag along. What I really liked is they were willing to do from the quote unquote hardest job to the strategic thinking, all. And I really love that quality in entrepreneurs, where there is no job too small, and because they understand the intricate detail, they are also willing to go up to the strategy level and everything in between. And that is something that I really liked about both those gentlemen.
We all know about your most famous investment. Tell us some, Flipkart, Ola, Big Basket, Make My Trip, InfoEdge. Tell us about some of your worst investments.
Worst investments, without insulting the people, is a very hard job to put me on. Give me a little more color about worst in what way?
Worst in what way, which you believed, this will eventually become a very great venture, very great business, but it couldn't happen by certain factors.
So why don't I talk about some of the factors rather than name companies?
Sure.
Because the companies might not be as instructive.
Please.
Okay. So I would, and let me talk about the worst mistakes that I have made.
Yes.
As opposed to the worst, quote unquote, trying to call the company worse. So among the worst mistakes I have made is I've backed 2 companies where the entrepreneurs actually swindled money from the company, and they were stealing from the bank. That is something that is not a very pleasant feeling to live with, because one wonders what mistakes did I make during the diligence process to not catch that. And this was despite reference checking and things like that. What could have been done to avoid it? Because that is the other question, that after you make the mistake the first time around, don't give them more money. So agar ghus bhi gaye ho, what can you do differently so as to catch that before the next time arises? That is the moral of the story, how not to make that mistake. One other mistake that I have made many times is having a firm belief that the company should change something, not express that opinion vociferously enough. That is always a tricky one, because you never want to tell the CEO how to run their business.
True.
Okay. Yet at the same time, one wonders that I knew that we should have done this differently.
And how do you do this?
I still don't know a good answer. One potential way to do it is to keep repeating that thing again and again, even though one sounds like a broken record. And then at some point in time, the CEO begins to realize that
we need to course correct.
I need to listen to this maybe, because none of us listen to things the first time around. Okay, I'm sure our parents have told us all kinds of things. I know my parents have told me all kinds of things that I still haven't heard. 55 years and counting, 56 years and counting. But as a board member, one keeps repeating that thing again and again, hoping that one day, and repeat it in different ways and get other people to repeat it and sit down in one-on-one sessions and so on and so forth. So that is one possible way to do it. I don't have a bulletproof answer to that one. That is another mistake. And then there are just some emotional mistakes, which are also very common. Just because I liked the idea, I backed the company without realizing that I'm trying to relive my fantasy, as opposed to because the business makes sense.
So true.
And that is an example of not listening to the market data, but seeing it through the filter of, अरे ये तो बड़ा बढ़िया आइडिया है, क्यों? क्योंकि मैंने सोचा था. Okay, अब कोई और कर रहा है, इसीलिए उसके पीछे लग गए. Okay, वो गलती भी काफी बार होती है. So these are at least 3 of the errors, types of errors.
You have surrounded on. I would say some of the great founders have surrounded you. So tell us some qualities of the greatest founders you have met.
Got you.
Or you have invested.
Ji. So one thing is, there are many paths to make a successful company.
Okay.
So there is not one dhacha or sacha.
No formula.
No formula. And most of these gentlemen and ladies, one of the most important things, if I were to abstract out, is those who think for themselves and do not try and follow a formula is one uniform criteria. Because let us say somebody says, oh, Amazon did this, but you are not Amazon, and one doesn't know why Amazon did this. What were their strengths? What were their weaknesses? What was the cash in bank? Who was driving the car at that point in time? Just because Michael Schumacher did this when he was taking a fast turn in some race doesn't mean I have the capability to do that. I should know what my capability is.
Right.
So thinking for oneself again comes back to getting the input, recognizing that input, asking the why, but then following your conviction. After paying due respect to that input. And due respect doesn't mean obeying it, paying due respect. So we hear these stories of Steve Jobs did this, or Jeff Bezos did this, or Larry Ellison did this. If you ask me, one of the most common themes is they did something that nobody else did. And if I were to take away one lesson is therefore not to do what they did. The lesson is they did something that somebody else never did before.
True.
So I need to figure out first principles. What is it that can be repeated, and what is it that I should think afresh? So that is one, which is to think first principles. Another one is to create momentum in the business, because momentum creates a sense of success, which creates more momentum. It's a positive feedback loop. So even though one is thinking big, one has to keep moving forward. चढ़ना तो एवरेस्ट है, परंतु अगर अगला झील पार नहीं किया
तो फिर वहाँ तक कैसे
तो वहाँ तो पहुँचेंगे ही नहीं. And strategy often gets given too much importance. It is the tactical progress
that takes you ahead.
That gives you momentum. And momentum sometimes means revenue, sometimes means traffic, sometimes means design wins. It means different things for different businesses. So one should figure out what does momentum mean for that business. We come back to the first principles thinking. But get momentum early, because that creates the excitement. That gets you good people, that gets you more money, that gives you self-confidence, and you get more momentum, as opposed to waiting for चलो अब सोचते रहेंगे जब तक कि बिल्कुल ठीक चीज़ ना समझ में आ जाए.
So one is this first principles thinking, and then taking a bet on certain things that may be contrarian or something, and then there comes a greater fool theory. Have you ever been privy to the greater fool theory, or you always have invested by first principles?
I have been the greater fool in many.
It happens in venture. So investors have FOMO, and then they.
Oh yes, believe me, I have been party to many FOMO related sins. So absolutely.
And were they did it happen to be a good bet, or
mixed bag? Most FOMO things probabilistically turn out to be not such good bets.
Wow.
Because one ends up doing stupid things. One ends up either paying too much money, or one ends up backing the wrong person, क्योंकि तब होड़ में लगे हुए हैं.
True.
तो ठंडे दिमाग से सोचना बंद हो जाता है. So most FOMO oriented bets,
right,
it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, turn out to be, but one also turns out to be lucky once in a while, because FOMO is induced by something genuine happening also in the market. True. Once in a while.
True.
And one does end up in the correct thing, but by and large it is something to be avoided, because those same opportunities show up a year or two later, and in general it is better to miss something good than to do a whole bunch of other things induced by the wrong reasons, and FOMO is very much a wrong reason.
And what were the hardest conversations that you had as an investor, sir?
Hardest conversations as an investor are always when, for me, and by the way, one blanket thing, please treat these all as my half-ass perspective, which has more probability of being wrong than right. But that is the only perspective I can give you, which is my perspective. The hardest conversations I've had uniformly are when one tells a founder that it is time for you to leave. And that also needs to be done.
How do you go about that, and how?
Directly, without insulting their intelligence, without giving them all this bullshit stuff कि अगर ये होता तो वो हो जाता, but coming at it straight from the perspective that you and what is needed right now are not a good fit. They clearly are smarter than I am, otherwise I should be running the company, not them. So one needs to respect the fact that one is taking a big risk in doing that, because founder-led companies are always more valuable.
True.
Always is a big word. 99% of the times more valuable than when founders are not leading. But once in a while, it is necessary to do. And that for me is the hardest.
So, what are you most bullish on in India for the next decade, sir?
I don't know India well enough because I'm not on the ground for 8 years and India has changed so massively. So you will get a very narrow perspective from me. So please take this with even a larger bag of salt than everything else. And being on the ground is very important to know any market. One area that I don't know if it is the most exciting area, but one area that at least excites me is I think a lot of BPO companies are going to get rebuilt because of what is happening in AI. Because I don't think AI will replace the people, but AI will replace a large chunk of what people are doing today single-handedly. So instead of a one-tier problem, I think it is going to become a two-tier problem, where a set of people who know how to use the AI tools first create a partial solution, and then human beings polish that partial solution to make it the full solution. And this is a very abstract description, but it applies to a lot of different things, including writing software, where you can see for certain class of problems, the software can be generated 90% and then a human being fixes the remaining 10. And you design systems very differently with human in the loop. So this is not it's not the same as building a product. When you build a technology enabled services company, you build different technology than if you build a technology product. Okay. For instance, if you build a saw, we come back to our wrench, the famous wrench. If that wrench is going to be designed to be held by a human being, you will design it differently than if it was the same technology that would be automated. If I'm making sense, because a human being will have some human feedback to knowing ki yahan ruk jao. But if you were designing a product that used that same technology, you would have to build sensors that figure out a force feedback
the right
loop,
time
and then you would need to figure out कि सिंक के नीचे घुसने के लिए क्या vision system चाहिए. तो wrench तो वो ही है, परंतु उसके whole goal you would end up having to build a lot of technology. So technology to be used by humans turns out to be a very different technology, a different software / product than a standalone product. So they're not the same things. So one area that I'm very excited about is what is going to happen to the BPO industry when you roll in AI, and a lot of AI can be rolled into several pieces of, and I'm involved in 2 or 3 companies right now like that. So that is one area.
So before we go to the end, to the rapid fire round, tell us how we can leverage what are certain skills we should focus, the students should focus on in order to leverage that AI boom that you are talking about.
Yeah. So I think AI, so there will be 2 choices that a lot of us will have. One is, do we want to go deep into building the tools of AI, or do we want to apply AI to some other domain? Okay. This is very much like where other kinds of programming is. Do I apply programming to something, or do I build the next generation compiler? Okay. The era of application of these tools to whole bunch of verticals, in my view, there is a lot more opportunity there than the opportunity of saying, let me build the next generation of AI tools. Just number of people who can be employed in one versus the other. So one should go down the, let me get deeper into the next generation of AI tools that is meant for those people who are deep enthusiasts of computer science / vector algebra / other domains of statistics and math. Whereas the application of these tools to the rest of the domains, I think, is a much, much bigger opportunity. So I am personally a much bigger fan of learning non-CS disciplines while also learning enough CS so that both sides of your brain are working. The knowing how these tools work allows you to think of problems very differently than people who only know that domain. So I think that cross-functional, a mechanical engineer who also understands AI will be a a formidable force in the next car design than somebody who understands only mechanical engineering
or only AI.
or only AI. It's this cross-functional knowledge that I think is a massive opportunity for a lot of us for the next 5 to 10 years.
Super insightful. So the rapid fire thing, sir.
Ji,
Do you read?
very little.
But tell us.
Mostly illiterate.
No, sir. IIT, Stanford, you can't say that. Then tell us about the certain books. Tell us about your knowledge resources. What are your learning resources? How do you keep yourself updated?
So mostly by talking to other people, which is why this business is so interesting to me, because I get to talk to people who are experts in their areas. So I get expert 101 in all kinds of areas. That is my main source of learning. And I do read mostly stuff around, sorry to go off on a tangent, but nothing to, actually I shouldn't say nothing to do with business. I think they're all the same things. But just reading more about how to simplify things.
Can you give us certain book recommendations?
One of the books that I really like is a book which is in the second dimension, in the second area, called The Courage to be Disliked. There is one, I read very few business books because I feel most of them should be converted into a 3-page write-up.
Okay.
But one book that I really like is an old book by Jim Collins called Good to Great. I really like that book. Another book that, and by the way, I think these books are very helpful in building companies, because the fundamentals of
businesses
and the fundamentals of what one calls spirituality are pretty much the same. Is the same set of problems, or good science, which is to look at facts for what they are, as opposed to look at them through a biased lens. The same thing that I've been repeating like a broken record is also important for friendships, is also important for blah blah blah. So end of random tangent. So another book in that regard that I really enjoy is Siddharth Hermann Hesse.
Right.
And like I said, I don't read too many business books.
Got it. Favorite listed company?
Favorite listed company?
Yes. And one in US and one in India.
I don't have. I would end up picking the two that I work with, Hindustan Unilever and Info Edge, but that hardly answers your question. Okay.
Favorite non-listed company?
Favorite non-listed company? That is a. So there are. I will. The two that come to mind again. I'm biased, so I hesitate to. I like companies that are run very honestly, which are transparent, and I'm involved with a couple such companies that I really like. So they are favorite not because of an exhaustive search, but favorite because one is Urban Company and one is Indigene. I think the teams are. The business, of course, is very good. The teams are just extraordinary, and lot to learn from those teams. So I really enjoy my interactions with them.
Thanks a lot for your time, sir. It has been a super insightful, and I've got a lot of questions, a lot of I have to go double click, digest,
and happy to communicate over email or phone or whatever.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for doing this.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.